Yes, let me do that.
So this is coming from the Creation Care Team of Virtual Bible Studies, a series of Bible studies we're going to be doing going forward, working together with Pastor Corey and Jim Dunson, Darlene Battle, and Christine Lewis are the members of the team. And we're following a package put together by Cassandra Wilson, I believe, who put it together for the Courageous Justice team. And there's 6 different topics. So the topic we're going to talk about today is our relationship with animals, and it's titled God Bless the Animals. Next, please. So in this series from Cassandra Williams, I'm sorry, I said the wrong name. We've talked already, Jim talked about us. I'm going to talk about animals and that we're not alone. Next November, Christine will talk about stewardship. And in February, April, and June, we haven't worked those out, but we will then complete these 6 lessons she had, and then we will revisit them in the future. So this is the second in a series of 6. Next, please. So what we're going to be studying tonight is we're going to think about the fact that we share the earth with millions of different creatures. And we're going to think about what the Bible says about God's intention for our relationship with these creatures. And the second question we're going to consider is how are we to care for or treat these creatures. So next, please. So ask questions. We're going to have some points where we can chat a little bit, or you can use the chat feature for things that you want to capture now to discuss later. Next, please. So if we look at some biblical scripture from Genesis, we look on the 5th day, God created the sea creatures of the sea and every living, moving thing with which the water teems, and every winged bird according to its kind. And then God saw that it was good. This is Genesis 1:21. And then on the 6th day, God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds. That's Genesis 1:24. And then God made all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kind. And then God saw that it was good. So in each of these, after he hasn't created man yet. Man is still created on the 6th day and yet to be done. But as he created all these other creatures, he said it was good. Next. So another thing that we learned from the creation story is that God blessed the animals. In the creation story, humans and animals were both blessed by God and referred to as good, that we just talked about. And then also in the creation story, the animals and the humans have the breath of life. And they have living souls and they're living beings, according to Genesis 1:30. Now, one thing I'm just going to note, in this presentation, I use creatures and animals interchangeably. And when I talk about creatures and animals, I'm not talking about just furry animals. I'm talking about bugs, insects, tiny microbial animals to the birds and fish of the sea. So animals includes all of God's creatures. Next, please. So if you think and stop for a second and you ask, well, what was this all about? And if you look at how all these animals and all these ecosystems interplay for our existence as humans, for the existence of our Earth to be a habitable planet, you see that this biodiversity was God's intention. He created all these creatures, not just for them to be here, but they were part of the whole system. They were essential. The air you breathe, the water you drink, the food you eat, all rely on all these animals being part of the world we live in. And science is finding, and people who are studying, myriad of interactions between these millions of different creatures that make the Earth habitable. Certain creatures are cleaning up waste, they're converting carbon dioxide to oxygen, there are plants that are, there's all this going on, and it was meant to be. This was God's intention. And when God saw that it was good, he meant all of creation. He didn't just mean humans. He meant all of what I created was good. And we need to keep that in our mind. And his intention was that we would have this biodiversity, and as we're learning, as we go forward, without it, we can't live. So it's part of God's plan. Next, please.
Do we all get to pick our favorite animal picture?
You can add. I was trying to make sure I had a little bit of everything, but I only had so much space.
Go ahead. I'm kidding.
No, it's good.
No hippos.
So in 2018, the World Wildlife Fund came out with a report that basically says that humanity has wiped out 60% of the animal population since 1970. And the UN just came out with a report this year that echoes the same. 60% of the vertebrates have been wiped out in 50 years. The freshwater habitats are being hit even harder, with 83% of the animals being wiped out. This is not total extinction, it's the populations of animals being reduced. And in some of the South American, Central American regions where you have even greater effect. So humans are doing this. Our actions are doing this. Our choices are doing this. So as we think about this, we're destroying God's creation. We're destroying the biodiversity that God put in place to make our world livable. And we need, as Christians, to ask, what can we do about this to care for God's creation? So next slide, please. There's some statements that have been made by some studied people. Professor David McDonald from Oxford University says, without biodiversity, there's no future for humanity. Without plants, there's no oxygen. Without bees to pollinate, there would be no fruits or nuts. Without animals to eat the fruits and spread the seeds, the trees won't be planted to grow to make the oxygen we need. The huge loss of biodiversity represents a crisis equal to or even surpassing the threat of climate change. Next, please. So I looked around and watched a lot of videos. This is a short 7-minute video by a AP environmental science teacher, and I think he does, Mr. Anderson. So we're going to go to class with Mr. Anderson for 7 minutes. I think he does a really good job of talking about this in a nice, professionally put together way that's worth watching. But while you watch it, think about this circle that is on the other side. All of this biodiversity in Earth supports our life. And out of that life, we have societies of people and we have eco-societies of animals. But so much of what we decide to do in our societies is driven by our desire to have economies that make money and to develop wealth. So as you go forward from here, think about this relationship to the Earth that's here to support our life and our economic decisions that we make every day. Okay, Pastor, you can run the video.
Hi, it's Mr. Anderson, and this is AP Environmental Sciences, video 35. It's on the loss of biodiversity. Way up in northern Norway is the Svalbard Peninsula, and on there scientists built a giant seed vault. It's protecting the seeds of humanity, our crop seeds, into the future. They chose to put it there because it's protected against tectonic activities. It's really, really cold. And also as the sea levels rise, it's going to be protected as well. The idea was hundreds or thousands of years into the future, we could go there and grab seeds and then start growing those crops again. Unfortunately, we've already had to make withdrawals from that area. And the reason why is the war in Syria put a lot of these drought-resistant crops at risk, and so they've had to take more seeds out and they've moved those to Lebanon. But it does kind of get at this idea of the importance of biodiversity. Biodiversity is not only species diversity, but it can be genes, species, especially our domesticated crops and livestock, and then ecosystems themselves. And they have value. They give us our resources, and they also do these ecosystem services. And they're at risk. We're seeing biodiversity loss all around the planet. The causes are habitat loss, loss, invasive species, climate change. We also have overharvesting, and then finally pollution are all impacting biodiversity. And so it's led to conservation. What do we do first? We have to figure out where that biodiversity is being lost. We have to figure out the conservation status of these organisms or areas, and then finally we can pass laws and treaties to try to preserve a lot of that biodiversity. And so again, why do we need biodiversity? It's where we get our food. It's how we filter our water, energy, medicine. We all get that from our environment. And again, our environment also does these ecosystem services. They keep our climate stable. They decompose material once it's died. They pollinate our crops. And so we need biodiversity on our planet for resources and to do these services. If we define what it is, it's simply a variety. Variety at the genetic level, at the species level, and at the ecosystems. And so those genes that organisms have, once the organism is gone or the gene is gone, it's gone forever. It's extinct. Species as well. These are all the fruits found in a certain area of the tropical rainforest, but also we're talking about the crops that we have. And so I think it used to be we had around 8,000 different types of apples that were being grown, and now it's 100. And if you look in your own supermarket, it's way less than that. And then it's ecosystem changes as well. Once an ecosystem is gone, coral reefs, for example, you can't build that back again. And so what is causing this biodiversity loss? Well, when I was trying to come up with a quick way for you to remember these 5 things, I came up with this mnemonic. And so if you think of the biodiversity COP, and if you think of high COP as a way to remember it, if we put those in order, habitat loss is the first big impact on biodiversity. So deforestation, when we're cutting down those rainforests and planting crops. Right here we're growing soybeans. This is looking from above where we used to have a tropical rainforest. We're reducing that diversity and we're replacing it with one simple crop. Invasive species, this is kudzu. It's a plant that was brought from Asia. These are the zebra mussels in the Great Lakes that they're really wreaking havoc. They came from the Mediterranean. We're also seeing climate change impacting biodiversity. So if we look at the polar bear, for example, will they go extinct? It's hard to tell, but if we look at all the areas where they used to do well, we're seeing a decrease in the optimal polar bear habitat. Also, over-harvesting. Humans have been harvesting animals for a long period of time. The dodo is extinct because we killed all of the dodos. And we're also seeing over-harvesting now, especially in our aquatic systems. And then we can have pollution. Pollution's impacting the environment as well. So if we look at that Deepwater Horizon explosion, that led to an oil spill, which is impacting biodiversity in the Gulf of Mexico. And it'll take us years to figure out how that impacts it. Now, this has been going on for a long period of time. Extinctions are a part of nature. And if we look back through the fossil record, we've seen 5 major mass extinctions over time, and they have different causes. But most scientists are pointing to right now as the 6th mass extinction. This is mass extinction caused by humans. We're seeing extinction rates that we've never seen before, biodiversity loss that we've never seen before, and its cause is us. And so how do we solve this problem? Well, the first step is to identify where the problem is. And so the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, has been around for over half a century, and what they've done is come up with these different statuses. Extinct in the wild would be one where we maybe have them in a zoo, but they don't exist in the wild. Then we have critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable. Then we have near threatened, and finally areas of least concern. And so if you go on Wikipedia, you can look up any animal or any plant, and it's going to tell you its conservation status. So for example, the whooping crane are endangered. The California condor is critically endangered. Humans, you can imagine, are an area of least concern. They've then created this red list where we look at how many of these species fall into these threatened or these red categories. If we look at mammals, almost 20% or over 20% are in this threatened kind of an area, and amphibians are really at risk. And so what do we do? Well, what we can do is pass laws. So in the US, we passed the Endangered Species Act in 1973 to protect species and the ecosystems on which they depend. And so it essentially is a list. So bald eagles are a classic example that were added to the endangered species list. And so there, I think, were around 500 breeding pairs in the lower 48, and now there's over 10,000. So once they recover, we remove them from that list. Grizzly bears were added. Their population is coming back. In Montana, there's a big debate right now over do we remove them from the list or not. But it also has to be balanced with human resources as well. So logging, for example, can impact certain species that are going to be found on the endangered species list. We've also seen global changes. The Convention on Biological Diversity in 1992, all of the green countries here signed on that biodiversity is important, it has an economic import, and that we're going to try to protect it. But again, it's not legally binding. And so we're still seeing huge decreases in biodiversity. And it goes back to the first thing I talked about in this class, the idea that the planet supports society, but society is driven by economics. And so we're never going to see decreases in biodiversity loss until there's an economic incentive or a way to do that. And so did you learn the following? Could you pause the video at this point and fill in the blanks? Well, let me do that for you. Biodiversity has value. It's a variety in the genes, species, and ecosystems, again, especially the domestic ones that we need to survive. That loss is caused by high COP, so that's habitat loss, invasive species, climate change, overharvesting, and pollution. And then how do we solve this? Through conservation, we figure out the status of those organisms or maybe those ecosystems, and then we start to protect them through laws and treaties. So that's it, and it's also the last of the videos on AP Environmental Sciences, so I hope that was helpful.
You can shut it down. So how did it feel to go back to school?
Good.
It did feel good. He went fast.
I'm
It
always
was an
willing to go
AP.
back to school. Yeah, that felt like one of the professors I had, where it's like, oh, you didn't catch it? Sorry.
He gave us the answers to the quiz, though. We got to say that. But,
Yeah. And we finished the class in one lesson because it was the last one. But I hope that was helpful. I thought he did a really good job in a few minutes to give you an idea what we're talking about.
can you share that video with people who might? Because I like to look at it again, or maybe show it to someone who just got
Yeah,
home from
definitely.
work right now.
I can
We
put the link in
definitely
the
can do
chat.
That would be great.
Yeah, that'd be great. And we're going to probably use this because we're developing some program for our youth, and this, I think that type of material would be good for our youth to see, and it's at the level that I think our youth can be engaged with it. All right, so I like I said, I looked. So just kind of recapping, he did a good job on it. The World Wildlife Fund report agrees with him. Habitat loss, invasive species. Right now we've got this bug flying all over the place that's coming into our area. It's going to destroy a lot of our plants. The climate change that you hear about, hurricanes, wildfires in California, sea level rise, and sunshine flooding in our ocean cities. A big one is overharvesting. We're killing food at an unbelievable rate to satisfy our needs. There's 300 mammal species now that are threatened to be extinct that we eat as food. And the oceans are massively overfished. We are overfishing. Industrial fishing is fishing so much that you'll notice that certain fish that you used to get in the market aren't there anymore. And the reason is if we fish too much, the population can't regenerate itself. And then pollution. Everybody's aware of pollution. The killer whales half the killer whales are being threatened to be gone in a very short period of time. They live in pods. They're very social animals, but once the pod begins not to be able to breed, then the pod dies off and ages out. And of course, pollution. And one thing that Darlene Battle is going to be talking in the future about is the plastic waste we're generating. And this idea of one-time use plastic, it ends up in the ocean, it breaks down, and now almost everybody who eats fish has BPA in their body, which is a chemical used to make plastic, because it breaks down in the ocean under sunlight into small particles, and the fish eat it, and it gets into them, and eventually we eat it. Next.
Just when we thought fish were healthy.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found is very interesting is this resource consumed. We're consuming resources at a destructive rate. Now, what this chart shows is the day at which we have used up, this is calculated by scientists, the amount of resources we have used as humans, the Earth can regenerate. So in 1970, it was December 29th. So we basically were using the resources of the Earth at a rate at which the Earth was able to regenerate it. This is called the Earth overshoot date. In 2018, on August 1st, we had used up the year's supply. And you can see by the red line moving forward, we're using up the Earth resources faster than it can regenerate. As a result, 5 months of this year will be borrowing from future generations. That's the way you should look at it. You're using up stuff that the Earth won't be able to replace, and eventually this won't work. Next slide, please. So the bottom line, I'm saying we're using too much stuff. One of the current economic people that it was reading, they said, you got to look at this like a Ponzi scheme. If you know what a Ponzi scheme is, I sell 2 people an investment, and then I take the money I got from them I sell 4 more people. I take the money I got from the 4 people to pay the 2 people, and I keep adding people. I never make any money. I get money from the next group of people I add on, and eventually Ponzi schemes break. In a way, we're doing the same thing with the Earth. We're borrowing our future. We're borrowing our grandchildren. We're borrowing future generation research sources ahead of time, and eventually the Ponzi scheme will fail. So, and when that happens, it will be crisis in our world for us. So this relates to the economics that the AP, Mr. Anderson talked about. It's our choice of how we use the materials to drive our economy. Next. So Jim talked about a couple of weeks ago, he did one on stuff. And this is from Jim's slide. And the message of stuff is the same here. We have this practice, we use stuff one time. That's why we'll be talking about how can we stop using plastics one time? How can we stop that? How can we be smarter consumers? And what Jim talked about, are we spoiling against God, or are we working with God to keep his creation? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. And what the sustainable talk and what we're talking about in climate change work and the people who are pushing for Green New Deal and more sustainable, they're talking about developing an economy that recycles, reworks, and reuses stuff. And we don't have so much one pass-through stuff. And by doing that, we'll reduce the rate at which we're consuming the Earth's resources because we'll be recycling it and reusing it. And so an example where we do this pretty well is aluminum cans. And we recycle almost all the aluminum that gets made, gets recycled and reused over and over again. Why? It takes about 10% the energy and cost to make aluminum from aluminum that's already been made. It costs much more to mine it. So the economics drives it. So almost every piece of aluminum made, the aluminum companies are trying to find it, get it out of trash, get you to put it in a bin so they can reuse it because it's economically smart for them. Where we don't do so good is plastic. The economics for plastics are really poor. Less than 10% of it is recycled, and it's a one-time use. And we view it as cheap. We view it as disposable. We think about it as waste, and it's all ending up in our ocean. It's ending up in our landfills. And as it breaks down, it's ending up in our food. It's ending up in our water. So we need to be thinking about how can we create this sustainable, reusable, reworkable. And it's got to be a change of how we run our economy. Next, please. So the World Wildlife Fund says that we have to bend the bio-curve loss. We got to mitigate climate change. We have to adapt to the impacts. Some of the adaptation is drought-resistant crops, coming up with things that can grow when it's hotter than it used to be. We have to maintain the quality of our soil, water, and air. And the rollbacks on the EPA that's happening right now are frightening to me. I'm a Silent Spring child. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in the 70s when the birds were all dying from DDT, and I've been an environmentalist ever since. And even though I worked in the chemical industry, I fought within that industry for environmental practices and to protect our soil, air, and water. And we need to do that. We can't live without them. Can't grow food without good soil. We can't live without air, and we can't survive long without water. So we have to start supporting sustainable sources of food and energy, and again, like I talked about, a sustainable view of our economy. Next. So this is where I wanted to get a little discussion going. So here's some examples how to get involved. We heard take conservation actions and to support the passing of treaties and laws. So we have to push our political leaders. We have to push the people of power. We have to make consumer choices that pushes the companies that are producing these things to start operating more sustainable. The examples here are if we were to cut the meat consumption by 50% and go to a vegetarian diet, that would save us 5 days in the overshoot. So that's from a resource consumption. It will also have tremendous savings in greenhouse gas effects and other ones. If we were to do energy improvements in our buildings and homes, that could make a 3-week improvement. If we would reduce the carbon component, our carbon footprint by 50%, that would give us 3 more months of resources in this resource consumption thing. If you look at these things that do, there are things that we can do individually, but many of these are going to require political action by our leaders. So we have to move our leaders to move. Next. And these are some of these things that Jim gave as examples to get involved. At this point, I'm not going to go through these because Jim went through them last time. I'm going to ask people to take a moment here and talk about what do you think about how much stuff you're using? And now that you've seen in 2 talks the fact that we're using so much and we're consuming so much that we're damaging God's creation, how do you think about what you use? Is this beginning to affect how you think about it? I know it's affecting Darlene. She come in with different ideas and things. I know that I'm doing different things as I learn. I'm doing actions that I can take, but I'm asking each of you if you want to share, how do you feel and how do you think about this in relation to how much you're consuming and using? Any comments?
Back in the day, we used to have to be careful with water, electricity, and packaging. We could not be as wasteful because we could not afford to keep replacing things.
Yeah, and I know I told this story. My grandma had this, my grandma's farm, they had this place where they put the trash they generated and they would burn it. And one year when I was about 8 years old, they burned it, right? And it was like a big bonfire. So of course I'm waiting for them to burn it again. I went to my grandma's farm another 10 years and they never had a fire because they didn't throw much out. The hogs ate it, everything got reused. The trash that a household generates now, it would take in a week. My grandma probably didn't generate in a year because they, like you said, they reuse, they have a different mindset. I mean, there wasn't a piece of aluminum foil that got in the trash can. It got reused and reused. Anybody else?
Just thinking, right there you talk about packaging and boy, online shopping, the big downside there is, first of all, the packaging, and then plus all of the shipping. I don't know the actual, how much more fuel is involved by getting things delivered to your house versus going to the store and buying it. But, the packaging is certainly an issue, a real issue with online shopping.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Anybody else?
I think I've seen something on TV recently about, maybe is it Amazon or whatever in California, they've got a big fleet of electrical delivery vans and trucks that
Right.
they're trying to institute into their delivery. I guess that would reduce carbon.
Yes, it will.
I mean, I guess that's,
And there's efficiencies in doing it as a fleet, you know, having the whole fleet managed and
I just saw that this weekend.
yeah. Anybody else thinking about the amount of stuff they use? And this is something to kind of think about.
I think about that and have thought about it all the time. I think I said that the other day. When you think about when we were little, you had a little basket, a peach basket type trash that you put out for the trash. The trash man came around maybe twice a week, but you know, our trash cans then they went to maybe a gallon, 3-gallon size. And now they're like what, 10, 20? I mean, we make so much more trash. And again, I guess it boils down to mostly the packages or the packaging of food. And if we eat out, the packaging of that food, I mean, but that you bring home or whatever, or you get delivered to your house also, or what. You know, I remember when we didn't have so much money around this house, and my in-laws, when they come over, they like at first they'd laugh, but then they realized it was like, oh, she doesn't use paper towels. Oh, she doesn't use napkins. You know, they used cloth things if we needed to, and oh, she's rolling the aluminum foil back around the thing, or the plastic, you know. Plastic bags from the grocery store get rolled around. My mom used to do that too. We'd roll them up and put them in the drawer and then reuse them. And so the less consumption. The other thing I remember my grandmom doing, so we're talking about in the 50s, because when I'd go to visit her house, she died when I was 5, and she would reuse envelopes, what came in the mail. She would cut the paper up to fit inside the desk, the big desk that she had, and that, you know, use that for scrap paper, use that to write things on her, and had it cut just so it would fit in the drawer. She'd use the envelopes, she'd use the mail that came in the back of it that wasn't printed on. And you know, I kind of grew up seeing somebody without realizing that they were conserving, but that's what she was doing. She was reusing the trash that came in.
Kathy, it drives Gabe nuts because I do the same thing. I open up the envelopes and I would work the math homework on them. He was like, "You got paper? We can afford paper." And I'm saying, "Well, now this envelope get delivered a letter, and now it's done math homework, and then I'm going to recycle it."
And then
so, and it works just fine. I mean, you can do math problems on the back of the envelope as well as a new pad of paper. But that's from my mother and my grandmother. That was put in me that you don't waste. You know, you don't waste. You're responsible for what you choose to use, and that you don't waste. And I think that's what God wants us to do. He wants us to use the resources He gave us, but He wants us to use them in a way of sustainable and not wastefulness. And this is going to take time for people like myself to change my habits. You know, they're not going to, habits take longer to break than they take to make. I know that from coaching. I mean,
well, I think maybe the other area of, I remember Jim bringing this up about that I didn't really think about the amount of waste in cloth, the clothing materials, this, you know, and again, I feel like it's gone through a process. I can remember people saying 20 years ago at our church, telling, you know, that if you don't wear it in 6 months, you need to get rid of it. You know, and they're buying clothes so much, and I'm thinking, geez, I'm wearing things that are 20 years old, but if they still fit, why not? Why do I have to, you know, throw it away just to get new things? I'm saving money, and then I'm saving, you know, cloth being put maybe in Goodwill, but maybe they're, you know, going to go in the trash because they're so well worn.
Well, the
yeah.
thing is, the clothing bank will take your clothes, what's good, to be worn will be given away, and what's stained or got a hole in it will be packaged up, and that goes to third world countries where they're not as picky or something. I don't know, or they do other stuff with it, so it's not going in the trash.
Well, that sounds good, doesn't it? Yeah.
So, you know, use the clothing bank anyway.
Hmm.
Yep.
But, you know,
Good.
the stuff that I don't want to give away because it's not really wearable, you use that for rags,
True.
right?
That's
You know,
right.
Nadine
Yeah.
knows about that, you know.
Yeah, and a better use at the end of the day, you can take it and put it into your gardens and stuff. You can shred it up and it will break down, and it actually will help if you have poor soil. I mean, there's a lot of use. This is things that I watched my grandmother do. And like I said, that I only saw one bonfire in my whole life of going to my grandma's farm because they didn't have them very often.
That's true.
One of the things that I've noticed is that to buy products that are made from sustainable resources and to eat vegetarian and so forth, it's more expensive to do so. And that's because it costs to, you know, have, I don't know, grass-fed beef as opposed to whatever else they might be using and so forth. So that's always been a factor for me. I feel like I put it in the frame of mind, like when I get to a place that I can afford to buy sustainably, then I will. But participating with the Creation Care team has helped me to realize that like every little bit counts. So it's in what I can do. Then when I get to the ability to be able to afford, I don't know, like moms, for example, don't most of their proceeds go to some type of, I don't know, African wildlife research or something. I know that there are plenty, and there's shoes that are made out of plastic bottles. I forget what those are called. These things all cost more money than your typical shoes and typical food is all I'm saying.
Hmm.
But I think that a lot of it comes down to the economy too. However, it is that we're going to make these type of green jobs available where every business is doing this, every company doing this. So it's not so much of a unique thing to be extra for, but it's something that is more common and more affordable to.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I do think one of the things, like when I first started buying organic, it was really expensive. But as more and more of the alternative farms are there and the volume is growing, these prices come down. So one of the ways to help the price come down is to consume it and build, you know, make that choice. But I mean, it's, again, they won't make stuff that people don't buy. I mean, so you got to look at things and make choices. Any other comments before we wrap up? We have a couple more minutes.
Yeah, I would like to go back to what Tom has said, was talking about the plastic, the stuff that we get delivered. If it's a small package, they send you plastic. So my suggestion, I'm going to do it since I thought about this, is to call the company and see if they can use like a bag opposed to the plastic. So I called because I get the steamed frozen vegetables that I was sharing with my group, and the lady that I'm studying from about plastic, she actually called the company Brita because their filters wasn't recyclable. So she asked why not? Won't they put recyclable? And they're like, no. So she had all her friends, they empty Brita cap and they mail it to the company. So now they are recyclable. So, and so I called the company where my steamed vegetables come in, the bag it comes in, and my bag is recyclable. So now I have to call, Tom got me wanting to call, I guess I have to start with Amazon and see if they can replace that plastic bag. Another thing that people can do right here in Delaware is DIMRAT. If we just, you know, go on their website, because now we're going to get you guys involved. It's going to raise your consciousness, and just see what's going on with DIMRAT and say, well, that needs to change, or that was great job that you made those changes. So,
And DIMRAT is, tell us what that initial stand for, DIMRAT.
Okay, Department of Natural Resources Environmental Control. So, for a while
that's good.
I was always going to their meeting fighting them, but anyway, but with them, they have a meeting coming up Sunday. They have a meeting coming up. So you could go on their website and see what's going on and see how we all could benefit from some of the service that they provide. And is it beneficial to us? Because they don't want to make changes. Everybody take nature walks and you may fish. So they don't want to make all those changes and have less cars near where you fish that is pollute, or where you have a picnic, so you won't be eating some of the fumes from the cars. And they only do that because we say something about it.
It's interesting. I saw an article about Lego, you know, all those little plastic Legos. When you open up the box, all those little pieces are inside plastic bags. They are in the process of changing over to paper bags because so many children who use Legos wrote the company.
Hey.
Good for them.
They say it's probably going to take as much as 4 to 5 years to make the change complete, but they are in that process.
How about, amen.
Yep, so we can move people. I think if I'm going to do the last 2 slides, Pastor will probably have stopped the conversation. Thank you, everybody, for participating and sharing your thoughts, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation as the Creation Care team. So let's move to the last couple of slides. I just want to come back to the biblical message here a little bit. I'm taking this excerpt from some information that was written by a man named Barrett Duke. And he kind of looks and says, animals belong to God. And he says, Psalms 24:1 states without reservation that earth is the Lord and all it contains is the Lord's. This is a fact that you hear regularly in Scripture. God is God's world. When God commanded the first man and woman to rule over everything, he was not relinquishing his ownership of everything. He wasn't saying, man, you now own this world. No, God was saying, I created this world. It's my world, but I'm letting you use it. And he told man and woman in the garden to cultivate it and keep it. He didn't say cultivate it and consume it all and destroy it all. He said cultivate it, use it, but he also said keep it. He said that humans are to be in a stewardship role to creation, not an ownership role. It's our responsibility to steward and care for God's creation. And he also said that animals are not subject to humans. They're not ours. They are subject to us, but they're not ours to do what we will. God does not want us to destroy or cause an animal that he created to go extinct. Now, extinction is part of the cycle of life, and things do happen that cause extinction. But he certainly didn't command us to cause animals that he created to disappear. Next slide, and we'll wrap up on the couple final thoughts on the last slide. So what does the Bible say about God's intention for our relationships with these creatures? That was a question I asked in the beginning. And I hope you see that we're designed to live in a symbiotic relationship with all of God's creatures. We cannot exist in an ecosystem that does not include the biodiversity that God intended there to be. The relationships can take different forms. They can be mutual, where both species benefit. They can be communalism, I'm not quite sure how to say it, where one species benefits and the other is not affected. And they can be parasite-type relationships where one benefits and the other harms. So like when we kill a cow, we benefit, the cow doesn't benefit. Those are all relationships that are possible, but we have to manage these relationships with the outlook of sustaining God's creation. And how do we care and treat for the creation? We just talked about it. Humans are to have a stewardship role to creation. We're not supposed to consume and destroy it. We're supposed to steward, care for it. And in stewardship, that means we can't use more than our generation is supposed to use. We have to leave it for future generations. So these are things that the scripture are clear about, and the Creation Justice Care Team is going to be giving us methods and opportunities to learn together and join communities of people trying to do things to protect God's creation. So the last slide, please. So you can contact me or any member of the Creation Care Team if you want to chat more or get more involved in it. And the last slide is the same slide Jim wrapped up with us. Some of us are already working toward becoming better humans for humans who farm for God. You can join us. Pray for the creation care that we're trying to do in the Creation Care Team. Join us in our study sessions that we'll be offering, and read the newsletters and the things that we're sharing. Help us when we roll out the study for the youth class. Help us, participate with us. And ask us questions and give us your insights. Share with us things that you've learned and know about, because we certainly don't know everything. And we want to learn from others and learn from you. And walk the talk. Begin to take an inventory of your behaviors and start trying to walk the talk that says, I'm going to behave in a way that cares for God's creation, so our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will have a world to live in. So I thank everybody for the time. I hope that this was helpful to you, and I hope that as you become more engaged, that you will join us in some of the things that the Creation Care Team is doing.
Okay, got a question, Alan, here for pretty much everybody. And I understand biodiversity, and I've often tried to, analyze what is this creature's role in creation, okay? And a lot of times it's being part of the food chain. That's the way things are. But one of the things I want to ask God when I get there, what was the role of mosquitoes? I suspect they're probably part of the food chain somewhere.
Well, definitely. Bats eat hundreds of them every swoop. I mean, they're food for bats.
Yeah, but it seems like the mosquitoes man, do we really need that many, God?
What eats a bat?
Yeah, but this is where one of the problems is when we make decisions, we don't need that certain insect, and we develop the pesticides to kill it, and then we put it in our water and we start drinking it. So it may be better to kind of come up with some other ways than just saying, I don't like this thing. One of the things that you saw there, the amphibians are being greatly affected. And one of the reasons is that they have very permeable skin, because part of how they breathe is through their skin and water. So every chemical that gets into the water affects them faster. So they're like the canary in the pond. They die first. It's like the canary taking the coal mine, I meant. The canary, but they're the canary for the pond is what I meant to say. They're dying off.
They also eat the mosquitoes.
Did you just see that this weekend? It was on, I think, PBS, about a frog in California that they've saved. Again, the drought around the water, they're losing their pond, and that it's going to be extinct. And they have scientists that went in and got the last eggs out, and they're raising them at a zoo, the San Diego Zoo. And then when they get enough, then they're sending them to other zoos, populations. So they're saving this frog population. I can't remember the kind of frog, yellow tree something, or not yellow tree, but something with yellow in it. But yeah, they were definitely, I think it might have actually been, there is a San Diego Zoo show that's on, that often does a lot of conservation stuff on Saturday mornings. And it really was saying exactly what you're saying, that the reptile population is really at its worst, and there soon will be no frogs, because of the way. Because when it's getting what's in the environment, it's actually attacking the reproductive ability of the frog. So that's what's happening with it breathing. Since it breathes the air through their skin, it's going directly to the reproductive part, and they can't reproduce.